The Marinade.
There's no O in Marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade.
That's
The Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle.
Faces lit up by their screens, plague confined unknowns. Pollen covered.
Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is episode 73, and our guest is Will Kimbrough. Will has lived an impressive and inspiring creative life, and his latest album, Spring Break, is evidence of that lifetime of experience. It's excellent. I highly recommend you give it a spin and then head to willkimbrough.com to get your copy. Everyone, this was such a pleasure. It is my honor to present my conversation with singer, songwriter, producer, and now budding author, Will Kimbrough.
Three women way out on the ledge, one shouted, "What's the use?" The Keenan cried a Galway song, the late great John Prine blues. A 50-year-old man can hardly sleep till 4:30. His daughter's up all night and his wife sweetly, softly snores.
Trying to get all this
While a madman make the
Better?
goddamn plans, it's
Yeah.
mostly
over
just
the course of
before.
time. Is that better for you?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm not
Thanks for
going
thanks for joining us on an uneventful Tuesday.
Yeah.
Probably more.
Uneventful, indeed.
It's funny. When we scheduled this, I didn't even think about the fact that it was election day, and so I'm kind of excited that we've got something to talk about other than the election. I'm sure it
Right.
inevitably will come in, but it's kind of fun to have this little escape. And I want to start, speaking of escapes, with Spring Break, which is just wonderful.
Thank you.
New record, man. I love it, and so there's so much that's interesting about it to me. One is sort of the scope of it. I mean, there's 14 songs on this record. It covers a lot of ground. There's a lot of emotion. There's just a lot going on. And I wonder if you can kind of take us to what was going on when you wrote the record and how you were feeling, if you can remember that time, even though it was forever ago, it seems like now.
Well, it wasn't that long ago. And I'll say this. So I was having a really good 2020, like a lot of people. And I started the year in the studio with Jimmy Buffett and the Coral Reefer Band. And recording the album, playing on it, co-wrote 4 songs, just really great way to start the year. Flew right from there, from the studio in Key West to the 30A Songwriter Festival in Northwest Florida, and then played awesome gigs with Radney Foster and Grayson Capps and Randall Bramlett and Marshall Chapman and Tommy Womack. And then during my gig with Marshall and Tommy, I found out that my neighbor and of course one of my friends and songwriting heroes, David Olney, had passed away basically on stage. And so that was the beginning of the year. It was still January at that point. And then my wife and I went to Australia. I had several folk festivals booked and then club gigs in between and some visiting friends in Australia. And so the first weekend got canceled because of the brush fires. And then we did the middle 2.5 weeks, and it was a great trip, great gigs, great festivals, great, Aussie stuff, Sydney, Melbourne, Great Ocean Road, a lot of nature, koalas,
Mm-hmm.
And then we got on the plane in Melbourne on, I believe it was March 13th, Friday the 13th, and to go to the Blue Mountains Festival in just outside Sydney. And so we boarded the plane. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning. And then my phone just blew up with The whole spring was canceled. So we looked at each other and said, well, let's fly to Sydney and see what happens. And so we ended up at the Qantas counter and went home. So then I came home to a shutdown world, basically, no work. And like everybody, again, I understand this is partly what everybody, but this is how the record started. So I started to record songs that I'd always wanted to record. And those include My Sin is Pride, Rocket Fuel, I Want Out, Philadelphia, Mississippi, Trains, Cape Henry, Plow to the End of the Row, Home Remedy, Work to Do. And then just do acoustic guitar and vocal versions of these songs, some of which I wrote with Todd Snider, some of which I wrote with Adrian Young, a guy named David Zolo, who's from Iowa, Amy Loftus, who I'd worked with and written one of the songs. And then I wrote the rest of the songs, basically. And before I knew it, I really had like 15 songs, but then one of the songs was a cover, and I decided not to put it on there. It just didn't really fit. So, I mean, within, by, the beginning of April, I had the whole record. So it was really fast. And I decided to put it out, and, now it's out. But, like late great John Prine Blues and My Right Wing Friend, which are kind of emotional and topical centerpieces of the record. Those were written like on April 9th, like the day after John Prine passed, basically like just I didn't have anything else to do but write and record. And even though I had some, and so anyway, we're working in the house, and anyway, so that's what happened with the record. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Is that for you? Who's that?
This is LB.
Hi, LB.
The Wonder Dog.
Oh my goodness, we've got two pups that we're obsessed with. But yeah, does it happen often? I think when I listen to the late great John Prine Blues, and that hit all of us so hard, those of us who like this kind of music, or those of us who like music and storytelling. Anyway, anybody who listened to John at all or had any interaction with him, whether as a fan or as a colleague or whatever, that one was devastating and in so many ways. Are you able to write typically in those moments, like when something like that happens, especially when we talk about, I mean, if you think about that timeline, like everything gets shut down, COVID is this huge thing. The brush fires are shutting things down. We lose John Prine, and then you're able to write that quickly. Are you able to write like that normally, or was there something else happening there that you were able to make that happen?
I think I'm able to write like that normally. So, and maybe I should take a little more time to process things, but writing is processing things. And my songs don't offer some answer to everything. They just comment or just describe a scene or tell a story. Some of the songs on this record really tell a story. Some of the songs paint a scene. The late great John Prine Blues doesn't tell the story of the death of John Prine, but it describes the atmosphere around the time in which he passed, and then at the end of the song, exactly what he meant to me. So it describes the surreality of April 2020 in Nashville, in my neighborhood, where I'm walking. When I decided to break the news to my wife and daughter, first of all, I was taking a walk with my wife, which is normal. Taking a walk with my 19-year-old daughter. I mean, normally she would be like, you guys go, or I'm going out with my friends, or number one, I'm away at college. But instead she was home taking a walk with us because she didn't have anything else to do. And I knew that John had died about halfway through this long walk, but I didn't want to spoil our walk because it was so nice. And my kids, knew John, they knew his kids, and my wife knows John and Fiona, and it was going to be very sad, not to mention the fact that we're number one, huge fans, not only of the music, but just of the person and the people and the family. And so I knew what had happened. And I'm walking on this walk, kind of like, la da 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 da. Oh yeah, look at the moon. It's beautiful. Yeah. And I get home and say, well, John's passed away. So, and then they, the end of the song, it's really just like a journal. It's like the first verse is, it's strange in Nashville. Our cars are covered with pollen. Nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's washing their cars. They're just getting covered in this green dust. And I'm walking, it's night. And then Nashville wakes up in the middle of the night because John Prine's died. And kind of the whole world does. And everybody wants to talk about what they remembered about John Prine and what his music meant to them. And when they met him, how awesome and nice he was and how supportive he was. And I had all those experiences since the late 70s when I first saw him in 78 as a 13-year-old. And then I was in a band on his label, and then we did a lot of gigs with him, with Emmylou, with Rodney, and so anyway. And then the last part of the song just says, greatness comes but once inside a very long, long while. And in this case, the greatness was the man himself, and I talk about him and I talk about his songs. So I think to answer the question, I think I'm able. I do this thing called Songwriting with Soldiers, and one of the things it's taught me is that if the job is to write a song, then go ahead and write the song. You can always edit it later. But I do believe if it's a song about a moment, then if you're in the moment, sometimes the song you write about the moment is the right song, and you can go back later and reflect on the times. But when you're in the moment, there's only one way you ever feel. And while you're still in it, sometimes it's good to write things down. It's like writing your morning pages, the famous morning pages. And so these songs were sort of my morning pages of this time.
Do you practice morning pages regularly?
I'm starting back. I used to, and I'm starting back. I'm trying to write this memoir book, or maybe just a creative memoir of being someone who's consistently written songs for like 40 years now. And I want to, and I have some good, Shaggy Dog stories, of course, over the years from all the people I've worked with, but I'm trying to, and also just to remember my own life. And sometimes even in a musical life, well, especially maybe a traveling life and working with so many different people all the time, because even when I've been with, say, Rodney Crowell for 7 years, or Todd Snider for 5 years, or Emmylou for 8 years, in between every time I come home, I'm in the studio with somebody else. So I've had sort of an unusual career compared to some people, that I've been a producer and a writer and a player and a band member and a solo artist for all these years. And I love it.
Can you talk? Yeah, I feel like that's exciting that you're writing all this down. Can you talk a little more about that process, the writing of the book process, maybe versus the songwriting or producing process? Do you have mentors that you look to for that? Have you done that kind of work before? Like, what does that process look like for you?
I've been a voracious reader my whole life. I grew up in a house full of books, bookshelves up to the ceiling. Now I live in a house with merch up to the ceiling, but
to make money somehow.
Right. And, so the written word is something I sort of idolize. I've been able to do music and been able to write songs. That's something that comes easier for me. Excuse me. And so it's intimidating for me I'm constantly reading great writers and then to try to put it together. But I think the process for me is kind of going over the timeline and starting over again, but keeping everything I've done to make myself have a really horrible editing job to do. But one thing I've done is I have a podcast via my Patreon, and I've been reading sections of what might be the book. And then when I have to go back and edit and listen to myself speak, that helps me a lot, because I don't think that the language should be flowery. I remember I worked with, when Rodney Crowell was writing his book, I was on the road with him the whole time. So every morning he'd go back in the back of the bus and write for 3 hours every morning. and he'd let me read pieces, or he'd let me read what his editor had corrected or scratched and stuff. And so, and also, oh Lord, oh babe, here he is. Come here, come sit with me. Yeah, we're obsessed with our dog too. So here it comes.
Yeah, mine will probably make an appearance. They're like co-hosts of the show.
Yeah. So here he is.
Hey, buddy. He's so cute.
Yeah,
How old is he?
He's about a year old. He's
Okay.
a rescue dog. He's gonna go bark some more, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, but there's a company called Dog Rook, and they make humane bark collars. It beeps, and then
Good idea.
And then it beeps a second time, and then it vibrates if they do it a third time. It doesn't hurt them. And we have a little rescue, and she's a perfect dog, except she's just a little barky dog.
Yeah.
And it has almost fixed it completely.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Dog Rook is the name of the company. It's like $30 or something too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, that's beautiful to know, and I'm glad I know that. Okay, so I love to read. I've been trying to read good writers my whole life, and so it's intimidating. But I do have so I try to tell the story plainly, and then maybe point out important milestones where maybe I moved the chess piece forward in terms of being a writer or being a creative person or being a producer. So I think at this point in my life, I've learned how to really enjoy the process of making a record, especially if it's like people playing together or one person playing and performing and trying to capture a performance rather than build a record brick by brick. And I've done plenty of those kind of records too, especially back in the day, back in the 80s and early 90s, where, there'd be a lot of sort of building and replacing. And then of course now we've got the digital, computer digital world, not just the ADAT digital world of like the 90s and stuff where everything can be put on a grid and all that. And people talk about this a lot, but I really like to, I like to record performances. That said, writing is not so much that. I mean, there is, Jack Kerouac and the continuous ream of typing paper that he used for On the Road or whatever, and that's cool. Right. I'm not writing that. I'm trying to remember like 40 years of playing in bands and learning how to do this. And so I figure the only thing I can do is write the whole thing out and then take out the things that don't seem to matter anymore, or don't seem to matter. They only, that every little war story is not going to matter to the story. So I'll have to figure that out.
That's
just going
to
take me a while. It's tough.
Yeah. Cause you've had quite the career. You just mentioned all those folks you've worked with, and that doesn't scratch the surface. I mean, the opportunities you've had and the records you've made. So that's got to be difficult. I mean, it's a nice problem to have, I guess, to have had all these cool experiences,
Of course.
But narrowing that down, one thing I want to get into, like I saw your Patreon, and we have a Patreon that I absolutely love. Patreon. I think it's so wonderful. It's such a cool way to connect with fans. And it allows me to do this, right? So it takes care of the overhead for this and allows it to be a hobby for me. And it's just, it gives me so much joy. Our Patreon does. And I think that's so cool how you're approaching it. It's kind of making me think about, ideas for mine. It like reading parts of it, letting people in on the process is really, really cool. Are there some of those, you mentioned moments where you move forward in your career or where you've taken sort of a step in your creative life, without giving them all away, so that folks do join the Patreon and buy the book later. What are some of maybe some of the big ones in your life where those moments where you've moved forward and what led to them?
Well, there's meeting when I was about 16, I met this guy who was like 22, and he had just moved to Mobile, Alabama, which is my hometown. And he was looking for people to play music with. And I was in a band I had been in since I was 12. And we had been playing gigs and endlessly since I was 12 years old. And so we were this band of friends from our neighborhood and from our school. And, we had fun. We won the talent show, playing Purple Haze and all this stuff. And And then I met this guy named Richard Gallo, and he had moved from Atlanta, and he sort of just taught me that Atlanta had a scene, and this is 1980. Atlanta had a scene, and I guess back then they'd call it the punk or the new wave scene, that bands played their own songs. And I said, well, I've written some songs, but we just don't play them because nobody wants to hear anything but, you know, Allman Brothers and the Stones and Leonard Skinner and ZZ Top, which is fine with me. It was great. But I had written some songs, and so I played him my songs. Brought to you by Dog Rook.
Dog Rook, yeah. We gotta get sponsored, man.
So I met Richard Gallo. He was from Atlanta, and he just told me people in Atlanta play their own music, and there's these bands, and they got record deals. And I thought, well, that sounds cool. People want to hear, you know, people's songs. And so we started to play my songs. Now that band turned into, because of the times and where we lived, and so that band turned into a working band. And it was still the early 80s. And so we never did make a record. I was just listening to our demos on some warbly cassette the other day. But what that taught me was that it was possible. And then that same band, which was called Ground Zero, we opened for REM on the last date of their tour before they made their Murmur album. So it was January 1982, and we opened for them at the Sanger Theater in Mobile. My friend had booked them for the college concert, but they could only play. It was January, so college wasn't in, but my friend talked the college into giving him the money to pay REM $1,500, which was the most money they had ever made at that point. They had just been on the road opening for Gang of Four, and they were about to go back in the studio with Mitch Easter and Don Dixon and make Murmur, which was their first record that would sell like 250,000 copies and send them on their way. But anyway, so we saw REM, and I learned from Richard, you can write your own songs and people might want to hear them. So we were playing our own songs. And then I saw REM, and I thought that they were going to somehow look different from me or be different from us. And they had a crummy beat up van, and Peter Buck had to borrow my amp because his was blown up, and they had to drive home that night because they needed to take all the money home to pay their rent and their bills for the next couple of months so that they could make their new album. And so from them, I learned that they look just like me. They have a crummy car just like me. Their amps break like mine, and I can do this. It gave me permission so when I left Ground Zero and formed this band called Will and the Bushmen, the first thing we did was made a record. We went to a studio in Louisiana and made a 7-song EP, which we could only afford to put out on cassette, but that was fine. Everybody had a cassette player in their car, and every college radio station had a cassette deck. So we actually had a record that people played, although it was a cassette. And so that was another one, and you go on and on and on from there, all the way up to where, Jimmy Buffett records my song, and I sort of get this adult validation of songs, and that a check comes in the mail a year later, and it puts a roof on your house, or, pays for your children's orthodontia or something boring and adult like that. But nevertheless, and all the things along the way, which I learned, we got a major label record deal. It didn't go anywhere. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what not to do. I learned a lot about what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do. And all that stuff just morphs over time. But the main thing I learned, was to trust my gut. If something really gave me the creeps, to not to think that I was obligated to do something just because somebody at a record company or a publisher told me that they liked what I do. And so when I was like 22, 23 years old, I thought, well, I should just do whatever they say and just do it and try to get in there, And I don't know what else anybody has ever learned except for maybe having a great manager just sort of stand between them and the business. But now there's not really any business. There's just you and your music. And so that's why I'm writing the book, because it's just going to be me and my book. And so there's a lot of things like that along the way. There's so many things like that along the way. And the farther along I get, the more it's just free. That I'm free to do what I want. And I'm free to feel an urge to do something and trust it And if I lose interest in a project, then it just stops. But the records that are out there and the projects that I've been part of are the fruit of the interest staying interesting.
It sounds like there, and maybe this is just coming from years of experience and from the successes you've had, but it sounds like there was a confidence in you early on. If not in the music, sounds like there was in the music too, but in at least like your ability to go for it, your willingness to take those are some risks that you're talking about too. All these things that you're taking along the line. So is that accurate that you sort of from an early age had this confidence to take those risks?
Well, music came easier for me than other things, and perhaps that was because, well, I had a natural ear and the ability to learn how to play, and then I started writing songs, and that all happened just naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And then you learn sort of that how to get yourself booked at a club or get yourself a little tour booked, and then you feel confident in that, and then you start to have, this is back in the 80s, you'd have like the labels come see you at CBGB or Paradise in Boston or 930 Club in DC, and that was very sort of swaggering. Yeah, Atlantic and Island are here tonight, blah blah blah. But when you actually get signed, then you're dealing with a whole other world, and I was never comfortable with that world, and I never felt like some kind of wheeler dealer business person. I still don't feel like that. I don't feel unconfident. I just know now to go, well, I need to retain my publishing, whatever little basic business things you learn along the way to protect yourself. And so I never got far enough in sort of the big leagues of music to really learn how to deal. Now I just know as just sort of a middle-aged man how to just shake somebody's hand and say please and thank you, and return a call, return an email, return a text. And so those lessons were more about what not to do. Although I went on and had, distribution from our records, and we did a record for John Prine's label, Oh Boy. And but ultimately in this day and age, if you don't see the obvious real potential to reach a big audience, then you should probably just do your own records until you see something different happening. And a great example of that would be, look at Jason Isbell. He's his label, and why should he not be?
Right.
So, why when let me ask you, here's the thing I don't know, is when you get a text message and you've turned off all your notifications and sounds, that you still get the little ding on your computer. That's what I will never understand.
I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, but so there's lots of lessons to learn. And so for the the podcast listener to this, I started out in a garage band. We played skating rinks and bar mitzvahs, and then when I was 16, I started playing clubs, and that band turned into more of a cover band because we could make a living doing it. And back in the early 80s, you had to own a PA and some lights and take it around everywhere with you. When I saw REM and opened for them and hung out with them for the day, they were like, you guys have a PA? What do you have that for? You just show up and the club has the PA, or the college has the PA, so we learned, and you need to put a record out, you guys have a record out. Why not? And so all that got just drilled into my brain by my heroes for that day, 1982, early 1982, bigger than life guys I'd been listening to every day on my turntable, So I made sure to follow that. And so the one thing that I actually followed through on at an early age and didn't procrastinate about was Will and the Bushmen made a record. And then and that was the 7-song EP. And then we made a 45. And those things just made their way into the world because at that time, like a college kid was just excited about live music. That was what they had. They didn't have DJs, and they didn't have hip hop, and they didn't have the internet. They just had Wednesday night, Will and the Bushmen, Thursday night, Sonic Youth, Friday night, Johnny and the Hurricanes or whatever. But so it was a blessing to be part of that time. Well, for one thing, I can't undo it. I can't not be born in 1964 and have graduated from high school in 1982 and been already in a band that was already working. So I followed that path. And then the Bushmen got a deal. We moved to Nashville. We got a deal, a New York pop record deal. And that was fun and eye-opening. I'll never forget being at a suite at the Hyatt Hotel at Times Square in 1989, and it was a big expensive party, and I think it was for our band, and all these label people were there. Everybody was just there drinking and partying on the label, and there was a big giant stereo set up in there. And so this is 1989, so it's like big speakers and a receiver or an integrated amp and a CD player, because that was the latest thing. And we stuck in the latest CD, or the first time Exile on Main Street, the Rolling Stones record, came out on CD, and we wanted to hear it. So we put it in, and this A&R guy from a major label came up to us with a British accent and started asking us what this was. And we just started telling him it was this new band from England. And he had no clue. It was like Tumbling Dice was playing. And, the guy didn't know it was the Stones. And I thought, This is the guy that's signing bands. Now, sure, he might have been signing, Haircut 100 or Spandau Ballet or whatever was happening at that time in pop music. But right. I'll never forget that. Like, okay, so these guys hold the keys to the kingdom. That doesn't mean that they necessarily know anything about music. Now, I met plenty of people who did.
Yeah.
But that was fascinating to me, because I was like 20, 23 or something. So I was, oh, you don't know who the Rolling Stones are, and that their album they made in 1972 that most people consider,
right,
a great record.
Right. One of the all-time greats.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's eye-opening. And I guess that's anybody's, this is, great expectations, I'm going to go to New York and everybody's going to know more than me. And it's like, not necessarily. And knowing more, knowing less doesn't really have that much to do with your success in entertainment industry either. I mean, there's plenty of, like, we live in a golden age of certain kinds of TV, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's so much music that it's very hard for most of it to rise to any kind of a cream of the crop. But that's also been true all of this time, and there are people there's a reason the Replacements are legendary, because they were so great and they were so terrible, and that is the stuff of legend, the possibility of how great it was and could be, and then the probability of how bad it could be on a given night. And people will actually flock to see that kind of stuff.
So interesting.
And I did too.
Yeah.
And so much other stuff from that era. So, and then you go on through time. So I'm in this band, we get signed. It's a big disappointment for that young person who swaggered through the clubs and got a deal, and then comes out on the other side, maybe 26 years old, but feeling like you've utterly failed and your life is over. And that was 30 years ago now. So, so I, did other things. I had another band. We signed with Oh Boy Records, Prine's label. We made a record. We were the big local band for a minute there in early 90s in Nashville. And then I realized I'd been in like a democratic 4-piece rock combo since I was 12 and I was 30. And I decided I can't do this anymore. I need to like just do my own stuff and not have to get permission from the whole band to do a new song and even it was a great band, but and so I went solo, and then that was about a year of my life where I wrote songs and recorded them on my 4-track cassette. And then Todd Snider called me in late 94 and needed a guitar player. And I met Todd and I heard his first record. And I thought, well, yeah, this is great. I could do this. It's Eddie Shaver and Doug Lancio playing on here. I can do all this twangy stuff and open tuning, Keith Richards stuff and slide stuff. I've been studying this stuff my whole life. So then next thing I know, I'm Todd Snider's guitar player.
Wow.
And then it's 98 and he gets dropped by MCA and the tour support goes away and the band goes home just in one day, one night. We're in Atlanta. The next night I'm home and I'm out of a job. And by that point I've got a 3-year-old child and the wife at home. And so immediately start looking for other work. 2000, I started working with Rodney Crowell. And meanwhile, I made records of my own and did tours of my own. So I'd be working with Rodney, and I'd make a record, and I'd maybe open for him or do tours of my own. And then I started working with Emmy Lou, work with her, do tours of my own, make a record. And then in 2003, Jimmy Buffett recorded a song, and the record sold 1.5 million copies. And because nobody in Nashville wanted what I did, like by that point it was, modern hot country, and I don't really write that kind of music. I've tried a few times, and so I owned all the publishing because I hadn't had a publisher in years, and that was great. So when the money came in, it all came to me.
Yeah.
And so then I was sort of validated as this songwriter guy who got in a cut by a big person, big artist. And the main thing it did for me was it just allowed me a little bit more freedom to do my own stuff. But yet I kept, like when Emmy Lou hired me, I was like, well, I got to go play with Emmy Lou.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
Even though I by that point I'd made, 10 records or something, but I went and played with Emmy Lou, and I still do. And along the way I became a producer. And after I did like 1 or 2 solo records, Todd Snider asked me to produce a record called East Nashville Skyline, which is a really good record.
So good.
Yeah. And I mean, that was just me being called for that record. And I did agree with Todd's vision and didn't try to push him in any other way. And I didn't roll my eyes at any of his sort of references that we were working. If he would tell us a sonic reference, I think he had experienced in the past that some producers and engineers would not like the idea of what he wanted to sound like, and they'd sort of ignore it. And I didn't. I would know if he was talking about Jerry Jeff Walker in a certain era. I would kind of know what he was talking about, and if I didn't, I would find out, because I wanted the record to be as close to what he had in his mind as it could be. And I think we were able to get that. And so that was a great experience.
Yeah, I'm curious. That's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I just think Todd's one of the greats, and but he's also, he's an enigmatic kind of character from the outside. Like I've never met Todd. I'd love to get a chance to meet him and have him on the show, but he's a wild man, and by reputation, and he's this amazing songwriter. He is one of the most incredible performers. I mean, part stand-up comedian, part storyteller, part song singer and player. And like, he's just amazing. He's a force in nature. And so I wonder, like, when he's got all these ideas, is it, were you guys in sync in some other way, or was it just because you just had the knowledge and you had the chops and you'd done the work?
We've been on the road for, 5 years before that. And so I had worked on his records since then. I worked on Happy to Be Here, and the following record before that. So he had kept me in the picture, and I had said, yes, I'll show up for whatever you want to do. And so when he decided to do East Nashville Skyline, he had a studio in mind and a sound in mind, and he had those songs. And so it really was pretty easy, although it was very informal. And I think that was that was on purpose by Todd. So I went along. I didn't try to push, well, it needs to be 10 to 6 Monday through Friday, and then we take the weekend off. It was, if he wanted to work, I would put together a band. And if he had a certain idea, we would put together a group of people that we would sort of curate the band, but on the spot. I mean, just get on the phone and start calling people. But he wanted that. He didn't want, he wanted the planning to be in his mind, and then hit people with the idea and then record it. And sometimes we'd have to do that a few times. We'd have to do that 2 or 3 times to get it to where he wanted it to be. But I was just the person who usually knew his references. We rode around in the van and the tour bus for 4.5, 5 years, and all we did was listen to music and talk about music all that time. So, and we were on the road all the time. So we did a lot of that. And I have an open mind, maybe not about everything, and maybe me saying that I'm full of shit, but I think that I do. I think I have an open mind about what kind of music he wanted to do. So that anyway, he could trust me not to secretly scoff at his idea.
You mentioned Isbell earlier, and I wanted to talk about the work that you did with him recently, with Shamika Copeland's record. Just really powerful story, that song that he's on, and what is it?
Clotilda's on Fire. It's about the last ship to bring in enslaved Africans to America in 1859, 1860. And it's my hometown, Mobile, Alabama, where that happened. And they just found the wreckage of the boat last year. And so that was the impetus for the song. I told Shamika and her lyric writer, John Hahn, because Shamika's not really a writer, but she's very like hands-on as far as like, you guys wrote the song. Okay, let me look at it. It's an interesting relationship. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And then we brought in, and we had gotten Jason to agree that he wanted to come play on the record. And so I knew I wanted to get him on Clotilda because it's such an Alabama story, and it's such an old story, and but it's brand new because they found it. They found the ship. And
a story like that, I love how you mentioned that it's such an Alabama story, because I think, one of the things that we talk about on the show a lot is sort of that, as the truckers call it, the duality of the Southern thing, and sort of the progressive movements in the South, but still reckoning with so many things from the past. And so when you're approaching a song like that, as a white guy, who grew up in Mobile, like, I think for me, when I approach work like that, there's always like in the back of my mind, a self-consciousness that I almost feel like, wait, is this my story to tell? Do I have something to add to it? Was that ever in the equation for you? Because it comes out beautifully, but I just do wonder, like, is that something that you had to wrestle with at all?
Well, I had my album I put out in 2019 has a song on it about the last lynching in America, the Michael Donald story from 1981. And so I think I'd already grappled with that when I put that out, because I sing his story in his voice from sort of beyond the grave, and I don't put any opinion about it. I just tell the story. 1981, I went out for some smokes, then I headed home, Alabama, picked up by some folks, took me to the woods. They beat me bloody. I begged them for my life, Alabama. So I told the story factually, and then I played it for Shamika, and I asked her to sing the female voice on it, which I thought of as Michael's. It's like the ghost of Michael Donald speaking, and then his mother singing an octave higher above him. And she heard it and she wanted to do it. So I thought, I guess that passed the test for her, and that was enough for me. I thought the story needed to be told in song, and just like Clotilda. And so when we started talking about that Clotilda, the slave ship story, it appealed to everybody, because it's not a song, in that case, it's not a song of opinion. I mean, it is. I mean, it does say that, it certainly doesn't say, I have no opinion about slavery. It says, that it's a monstrous history, and it's a past. But it also talks about the resilience of the people who came back to form the community of Africatown, and they're still there. I mean, they've struggled with poverty and racism and just poverty. And so the answer to the question is, yes, I think about it, but we moved on past it because I knew Shamika wanted to sing the song, and she wanted us to write it.
That's beautiful. So I love that. And I think that's how I've been trying to approach things like that too, and projects like that, is that I had a mentor years ago, for my day job. I work as a middle school teacher, and he was kind of my coach, basically, right? My instructional coach. And he's a Black guy, and I was teaching almost entirely Black students. And so there were moments that I would feel like, I'd feel almost like unworthy, right, of being in that space, knowing that there were a lot of Black role models who could have been there for my kids and could have maybe brought a different experience.
Right.
And he said to me, he's like, yeah, sure, that's true, but those folks aren't here right now. You are. You have something to say, you have something to add, and you have a perspective coming from being a white guy growing up in these environments. You have a perspective that could be valuable for your students. Don't shortchange yourself just because you didn't grow up exactly like they did. That doesn't mean you don't have something to say, and that doesn't mean you can't be of help. And that really helped me think through those moments. And so anytime there is and they don't happen very often now for me yet, but I certainly seek them out. But whenever I have an opportunity to creatively work with someone on something heavy like that, I mean, doesn't get a whole lot heavier than slavery. So in those moments, I try to remember that.
And it feels good to write about something rather than just, what's going on in I've written, I think the greatest songs are probably love songs, because that's the condition that we all live in. We either have love or we don't, and when we don't, we're not happy. Wow. And but at the same time, a song about Clotilda could be what vacuum of love could create a situation where a rich man makes a drunken bet that he can bring Africans back when importation of slavery has been illegal for 50 years at that point, and then go actually do it. That kind of like I don't know what you could compare that to, but I guess the only thing you can compare to is that he thought it would be a gas to bring some African people back and put them into slavery illegally.
Right.
Win a bet with his rich friend. And so, but, also with trying to just tell that story is more told with some more emotion about it, because I think Shamika, she's the descendant of West Africans who were brought here as slaves. Mm-hmm. And so if she okayed that version, then that's fine. And we talked about it a lot and went back and forth about it. And I sent her the Michael Donald song too, where I wasn't trying to have a point of view. I was just trying to tell the story. And so I think if you just tell the story, then there's nothing wrong with telling a story.
Right.
And anybody can have their point of view. Somebody could say, yeah, you're wrong. You don't have the right to do that. But we did it. And so, I don't know. I'm self-critical, but, and try to self-edit. But then again, in this case, we had the idea for both of those songs, for the song from Michael Donald's lynching and for the song for the Clotilda slave ship story. And we went through it, and I think it's a welcome story to our time to tell those, because they're vital. They're human stories of importance and interest.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it turned out beautifully as well. This has been such a pleasure, Will. We always end on what you're getting down on, like what art has you inspired right now? What are you reading or listening or watching to, or maybe watching, or maybe I don't know, whatever it is that's got you fired up art-wise.
We just watched My Octopus Teacher, which is unbelievable.
I haven't seen it. I keep hearing such great things.
You got to see it. It's just so beautiful, and just beautiful in all ways, visually, story-wise. And we started watching Queen's Gambit, which is brilliant. And I've been reading Pat Barker's trilogy from the World War One, and I've had to kind of give it a rest lately. And so I started reading Rebecca Solnit's book it's nonfiction, and it's about how people behave in a disaster. And it's great. It's called A Paradise Built in Hell. And it's a big part of the book is about the earthquakes in particular 1906 earthquake and fire in San Francisco. And it's great. And so I'm reading that, and I've been listening to I'm working on a lot of music all the time. So there's that. I went down the rabbit hole of this guitar player named Dennis Budimer, Budimir, and he was one of the Wrecking Crew, the people that played on all those records for Phil Spector and out in LA.
Glenn Campbell and all of them.
Yeah, Tommy Tedesco, Glenn Campbell, Hal Blaine, Carol Kay, etc. Played on Pet Sounds and played on Birds records, etc. Sonny and Cher, on and on and on. So I found out I was listening to a podcast, and it was Bill Frisell talking about something, and he just started talking about this Dennis Budimer record. And so, of course, I immediately went and looked at my local record shops, couldn't find anything, went on Discogs and found all 4 of these records. He made 4 records in the 60s, came out on this label. Here's the point. They were recorded at home on like a reel-to-reel with these borrowed microphones, and then their friend had a record cutting lathe in his garage. I mean, they're in LA and they're pros, but it's a DIY jazz record. A couple of records. Jim Keltner's the drummer who was, became super famous and played on the Traveling Wilburys and all that stuff, and tons of records. But I'm down that rabbit hole, and they just have. I'm gonna hold on, and I'll read you.
Yeah.
So these records have little notes on the back, like jazz records used to have these technical notes, but so these ones say like recorded February 2, 1964 in Los Angeles, California, our Mount Washington studios, on a concert tone 505 at 7.5 inches per second, remastered from original tapes at 15 inches per second. Some informalities of the session include sudden volume changes, partly due to people wandering away from the microphones or getting too close to them without noticing the engineer who was busy listening to the music. The listener will note these changes if he is listening to them and not to the music. Mastering by Cecil Charles Spiller. He finally got his stereo rig. I mean, and there's every record has these notes that are just, I bought them for that.
Yeah.
The notes were just fantastic. This is a variable fidelity recording, but it is entirely of a listenable fidelity and often pretty high fidelity. Actually, variability is explained in the liner notes. All material was recorded on a concert tone 505 using an EV666 microphones. A dinky little crystal mic. That's why the drums are a bit, shall we say, resonant. Cecil Spiller remastered all selections at 15 inches per second and balanced up levels, cleaned up the sound, and made fun of our recording. I mean, they just go on and on. There's, I could just keep going and read you all of them, but
it's great.
Except for one selection with Gary Peacock, recorded on an MPEX 960 in October 1961. All materials were taped in 1963 on a Concertone 505. Some distortion breakup can be detected in the guitar sound of the earlier track due to overload on the original masters. Although sound here is largely of high fidelity, album recorded, conceived, blah, blah, blah. So it just goes on and on.
That's great.
Anyway, I love that kind of stuff. I love records and so just trying to read and listen to music. And you said this earlier. This is a great way to spend a chunk of the of election day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, thank you for that.
Thank you, Will. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you for being so open, and thank you for your record, Spring Break. It's beautiful, and folks should check it out and check out your Patreon. I'm definitely going to check it out, and I'm so interested in that podcast idea. And just thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, man. Take care. Thank you so much.
Take care of those dogs.
I will. Yeah, likewise. Dog Rook. All right.
I'm getting on it.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
By day we keep apart 6 feet, all night we closely watch. While in the dark our dead dogs bark and take it up a notch. Don't bother adding up the debt, son, don't you light that fuse. And ain't nobody dancing to the late great John Prine blues. Greatness comes but once inside of
Will Kimbrough, y'all. Thank you so much, Will. Thank all of you for listening. Thank you for your support of the show. We appreciate you so much. It has been a crazy year as we wind down on 2020, but I'm reflecting a lot on how lucky we are. If you're new to the show, check us out on social media. We're on Twitter and Instagram, and we love interacting with folks over there on both of those channels. MarinadePodcast.com for all things The Marinade, including written pieces, our online store. There's some website exclusive episodes from back in the day on there. Some of my concert photography, some photography from the great Jen Ross, our good friend. So many wonderful things over there on MarinadePodcast.com that we would love for you to check out. If you really like what we're doing, please consider joining our Patreon community, where for just a few bucks a month, you can support the show. It's a chance to dive a little bit deeper, to connect. We have Patreon happy hours where we all get together via Zoom and chat and chop it up and talk about art and just kind of generally bullshit, honestly, and have a drink or not. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can bring your whiskey, your weed, your wine, your water, or nothing at all if you just want to hang out. It's a really fun way to connect with the show, and it means a lot to me to be able to connect with fans, many of whom have become kind of friends, really, is the best way to put it. This thing really has connected people in a way I did not expect. So if you like that, like what we're doing that much, check us out over on patreon.com/Marinade Podcast. We also have a podcast called Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that have shaped and continue to shape my creative life. I tell stories over there. Sometimes I'll have a special guest to talk about some things. So, yeah, check it out if you can swing it. If not, tell a friend about the show. That makes such a difference. Word of mouth is so huge for us. If you can just take 2 seconds to rate us on your podcast app, that really makes a difference. Leave a rating if you're up for it. Thank you so much to folks who have done so. It makes a big difference for us, and it makes this thing viable. It gives us a chance to continue to do it, and I will continue to do it as long as people are listening. I'm just so grateful for this year. I mean, I'm lucky, right? I'm one of the folks who not only didn't lose his job, but actually got a pretty significant promotion during this time from my day job. And then with the show was able to connect with people that I'm not sure we would have necessarily had before, just for various reasons. Not because we don't aim high, we certainly do, and we've had some amazing guests in terms of notoriety is all I'm speaking to here. Everybody who's been on the show is an amazing creative, but there are, some folks who have really big audiences, people like Brian Fallon, who may not have had the time because he was doing, he might have been doing a bigger show, or might have been doing some kind of press around a show that he was playing in town, and we were able to connect on Zoom, all because of Twitter and the pandemic and just all the circumstances surrounding it. So weirdly, it's been a year of growth for the Marinade, and I'm super grateful for that. And again, as I say, just about every time, that is a testament to you all and the things that you have done in spreading the word and continuing to give me feedback on how the show has impacted you. If you're listening right now and the show has done something for you, every time you share that, every time you tell me that on social media, every time you send me a message privately, however you prefer to convey that message, y'all, I'm telling you, it makes a difference. It fires me up. I love doing this anyway, but when I get that makes me want to reach out, right? And so I think that's a good segue into the segment of the show, What I'm Getting Down On, where I talk about the art that is inspiring me at the moment. I turned 40 since the last episode a couple weeks ago, and my good friend, the wonderful photographer Jen Ross, let me borrow a copy of Joni Mitchell's 75th birthday tribute record. Maybe she was sending me some kind of message there about my age. I didn't really think about it like that till this moment. But that was she gave me a couple of records as well that just knocked my socks off as gifts. But then she loaned me this record, this tribute record, and it's just so. all of these heavyweights are on this tribute record, right? Chris Christopherson, Brandy Carlisle, James Taylor, Shaka Khan, Emmylou Harris. Like, there's all these incredible people and legends in popular music. But what really stands out is all of the songs are Joni Mitchell songs written by Joni Mitchell. And of course I've heard them, I've heard them for many years, and they're classics. But to hear them through the lens of these legends was eye-opening for me. And I think the thing that stood out was the strength of the songs and the reverence these legends have for Joni and her music, which isn't surprising, of course, in hindsight, but it's inspiring. I mean, she has written just some of the best songs of the last 50 years. And, when you go back and you listen to them through a different lens, I almost wonder if I've been taking her for granted. And that, not that I don't love her and sing her praises, but it makes me go, oh man, I should be doing more of this. I should be listening to more Joni Mitchell and singing her praises more. Not that she needs my publicity, but it's still fun to be immersed in her songs in a different way and see them through the lens of these legends. So that's what I've been listening to pretty heavily, and there's all kinds of other stuff too. But I want to get into a couple of things. One is I've been struggling for something to read. And the reason I've been struggling is I think I haven't been having a hard time focusing on the reading. If you have been listening to the show this year, you know that when the pandemic began, I had no problem writing, but reading was a struggle for me. Now I'm kind of on a roll. I'm reading fairly constantly. And I read the book A Gentleman in Moscow, which I've mentioned on the show last time, that I finished and I love. And since then, I've kind of been like, well, I want every book to be that good, right? Like, I set this bar too high. So I've kind of been picking at novels and that I've had on my shelf for a while that, somebody gave me or I picked up at a yard sale or a Goodwill or something over the years, and just nothing has landed. And then I finally yesterday got David Joy's When These Mountains Burn, his newest book. I love David Joy. And I'm so excited for this. And I picked it up today. Y'all, 20 pages just went like that. It's that kind of a book. He's so good. And especially if you like Southern literature, I don't want to pigeonhole him by any means, but if you like Southern literature, check out that book, When These Mountains Burn. Like I said, I haven't really gotten that far into it, but it just grabbed me immediately. Just the richness of the characters and the language and how well he sets a scene. But then I tell you all of that, and then I get to the moment that I really want to talk about, which is what I've been watching. Last night, I had this whole artistic, spiritual experience, is the only way to put it. I had an unexpected day off today. So last night, my partner in life, Chris, and I got a bottle of wine, and I stayed up past my bedtime. And Chris, if you don't know, is a visual artist. She's best known for her paintings, but she also does woodworking and has been recently making candles and crazy stuff with plaster. She's just so inspiring and constantly creating something out of nothing. And it's amazing to be able to witness what she does every day. Anyway, she made this mold of her hand and is creating a lamp out of it. So, and I hesitate to go too far into her process for fear of selling it short due to my own inadequacy with words. But last night she set up her art studio in our living room, and the hand was finished, and she painted it using a paint pouring technique that she uses. And it created this gorgeous marbled hand, right? Well, it takes a while to do that, right? It's quite the process. And so while this was happening, I was watching My Octopus Teacher. Now, if you, like me, are late to the My Octopus Teacher party, I recommend fixing that oversight as soon as possible. The film is a documentary made by a South African filmmaker. It's ostensibly about his relationship with this octopus, but it's really a story about family and love and relationships. So picture this scene. I'm having a glass of wine, one rescue pup lounging on the couch to my right, the other on the couch to my left. My talented, hardworking, incredible partner creating this gorgeous art right in front of me while I watch an astonishing film whose core message is about relationships. Now, the picture I'm painting might sound like a bit of a brag as I say it that way, and that might be fair criticism. But what I mean to say by its inclusion at the end of this episode, near the end of the year 2020, is that living in the moment of creation, being present when those subtle acts of magic are occurring, is a goal that is attainable for all of us in our own way. And if we're in the habit of both creating and living in those acts of creation, then the very real challenges of existence, which seem to loom as enormous mountains right now, will go from dangerous technical climbs up a sheer face to difficult yet fulfilling treks to the summit. I love y'all. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, go out and create something. Cheers, y'all.